Allison, are you in it?
No. Okay, I had a question from chapter 12. Why does the author feel the need to explain the man he killed in so much detail, and what effect does it have on the reader?
I think that he explains it in so much detail to kind of emphasize like how deeply it affected him, because you can't just look at a body and know all of those things and have them ingrained into your memory after such a long time. In the book, it mentions that he didn't stop looking at the body, and Kiawa, I think it was one of his fellow soldiers was telling him that he needed to talk and like move away from the body and stop looking at it. So it just kind of shows, again, how much it affected him and how he really, like, how guilty he felt about it, I guess.
I agree with Gianna. I think it's supposed to like show like how traumatic it can be for someone, like after they killed someone, like how traumatic it can actually get.
I agree with that, because usually when there's like a really traumatic event, you usually remember every single detail very vividly, and you remember like how you felt and like all the just the little tiny details. So I think it really showed how much it impacted him.
I had a journal entry. It was the first sentence of the chapter 12, and it was a really long sentence. I'll just read a couple words of it. His jaw and his throat, his upper lip and teeth were gone. His one eye was shut. His other eye was star-shaped hole. And there's a lot more description to it, but I think it deeply impacts the reader because you can see the full picture of what the man looked like as if you were like there and standing in front of him. And I have a question. What is the author's tone about the man he killed?
He definitely feels guilty for what he did.
I think that he also is like trying to throw sarcasm into it too, because like after you feel so guilty, like you're trying to like get the guilt away. And I have a quote that says, "Oh man, you fucking trashed the fucker. You scrambled his sorry self. Look at that, you did. You laid him out like a fucking shredded meat." I feel like he put that in there to like give like the reader a visual, but also to bring sarcasm into the piece.
I have a question coming off of Mariah. In The Man I Killed, what was the purpose of O'Brien repeating himself when he is describing how the boy looks? What point was he trying to get across?
I think he was so repetitive because, I mean, it was the way he told the story so readers can like visualize the man and understand how he was feeling when he saw the man dead. Everything that was going through his head, I think that's why he repeated it so much.
I think it was to make it more, to make the person he killed more human, and I forgot what I was going to say. I forgot what.
As soldiers are trained not to feel emotion when someone or when they see someone dead. And one of my journal entries was about how he can attach faces to grief and love and beauty so he can feel again. And I feel like he repeated all of these things and he described the life of the dead man just so that he could actually feel empathy for the man instead of just pushing it.
I think that he repeated himself in a sense to kind of get the reader to know how like he couldn't get it out of his mind, because then if he repeats himself, then you think about it more too, like how he's thinking about it repeatedly.
So the chapter is called "The Man I Killed," but in the last sentence of the chapter it says, "Did you ever kill anybody?" And I can say honestly, of course not, or I can say honestly, yes. So do you think he actually did kill the man, or someone else did and he just thinks that he did?
Okay, so I think that he didn't actually kill himself, but because he's in the war, he blames himself for a lot of the deaths just because he is a participant in the war. Like, he blames himself for maybe all the deaths, and I'm sure other men do too.
So I have a quote to kind of go with that. It's on page 171. It says, for instance, I'll start at the beginning. He says, almost everything else is invented, but it's not a game, it's a form. Right here, now, as I invent myself, I'm thinking of all I want to tell you is about why this book is written as it is. For instance, I want to tell you this. 20 years ago, I watched a man die on a trail near the village of Maiki. I did not kill him, but I was present, you see, and my presence was guilt enough. I remember his face, and then he just kind of talks about I remember feeling the burden of responsibility and grief. I blamed myself, and rightly so, because I was present. But listen, even that story is made up. I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to know why the story truth is sometimes truer than the happening truth. I'm sorry, that was hard. So, um, yeah, I don't really remember your question or what you said. It just, I'm sorry.
I just
Yeah, so that was just kind of to go along with what you said.
Why do you think the author uses lies to get at the truth?
I think that kind of goes with the last line. He says, I want you to feel what I felt, and I want you to know why the story truth is sometimes truer than the happening truth. So sometimes you can't really feel with like simpler words how he actually felt. I feel like a lot of the imagery and embellishments that he uses throughout the story are there to give you a better idea, even though it might be made up.
I think he wanted to like tell a story along with it so you can understand it better, and it'll just.
Kind of, sorry. I kind of agree with Mariah. I feel like he was just trying to get his point across with stories, and he wasn't really like trying to like tell his truth. He was just trying to tell like the truth of the war and like everything that was going down there.
I also go ahead.
It's like when you like people lie in real life to avoid hurting other people, but in this case, he's lying to get you to feel with it. And I don't think that we'd be able to relate unless, because he talked about throwing the grenade, which he didn't, but we can imagine what it would be like to throw that grenade and watch the movie.
So I kind of have a question to go with this, and then a quote that goes with it. So I said, O'Brien has a specific reason for writing everything that he does. So why does he tell us that almost everything he writes is invented? Or rather, why does he write this story truth rather than the happening truth? And that was back to page 171.
I think he embellishes it so to like make us understand it better. But it might not have happened to him. It could have happened to someone else, another soldier, or the fact that's how he saw it. So
I think that he tells the story truth rather than the happening truth because there might have been some spots where if he were to just kind of describe what actually happened, then we might be like, oh, that's not like awful. But if he were to embellish it and use words that make us feel a little bit more than what might have actually happened, then we can understand how hard it would have been and how much of an impact everything that had on him, rather than reading just like a little snippet of what happened.
I think he knows that it would be hard for us to understand and actually grasp what happened, so that's another reason why he has to kind of make up stories to go along.
I agree with what Abby said. I think that he wrote it because, like, when you hear about a story, everyone like has a different view on it. But like when you're like in the war, you already like have a different view because you're going through so much and your mind is already somewhere else. So I feel like he had to embellish it to make us realize what it actually is.
So going back to what Corinne said a little bit ago about throwing the grenade, he told us that he threw it. So in our minds, we don't see ourselves throwing the grenade. We see, if you do kind of like picture it in your mind as you read, you see him throwing the grenade. So that's again kind of like a perspective thing where he's trying to get you to see what's happening and not see yourself do what's happening, if that makes any sense. And then I have a quote from page 152. It says, you start sometimes with an incident that truly happened, like the night in the shipfield. and you carry it forward by inventing incidents that did not in fact occur, but that nonetheless help to clarify and explain. So that's kind of building off of what everybody said, that he's just trying to make his point clearer and to emphasize what he's trying to say, because you can't just take a little tiny bit and make them understand completely what you're trying to say, especially since everything in the war was so emotionally impactful and physically, and it was just overwhelming. So
I have a question to kind of go along with that. Do you think that the story would have been as impactful emotionally about the Vietnam War as it is if it were told as the happening truth rather than the story truth?
I don't think that it would be as interesting because maybe his happening truth like wasn't all that bad because like everybody's like perspective of war is different. Like different things happen to everybody. So even if he was like embellishing stuff, it was still about the war and it was still actually happening in the war. It just wasn't what happened to him.
Okay, so I have a quote. I'm skimming across the surface of my own history, moving fast, riding the melt beneath the blades, doing loops and spins, and then I'd take a high leap into the dark and come down 30 years later. I realize it as Tim trying to save Timmy's life for the story. So, why do you think like writing the book helped him with the lies or without?
So I think there are a few reasons behind this. He mentions being able to save the lives of soldiers that passed during the war. And by saying this, I kind of think that he means he's carrying their story on, like he's bringing them back to life with his stories and keeping their memory alive. So that's kind of partially what I think he means by saving himself. And then another thing is with Norman Bowker, he mentions, I think in his letter or somewhere O'Brien writes, that he couldn't really find something to do with his life after the war, and he was just lost without it, even though it was horrible for everyone involved. But I think that this is O'Brien's release for the war, and it gave him something to do afterwards. So in writing, he's saving himself from going insane with not having anything to do.
I agree with that, and I also think that it could have been to kind of help him talk about it because he was told that he needs to talk about it in the book, but yet, as it would be for anyone, talking about something as traumatic as being through a war would be extremely difficult. So then, writing a book wouldn't be so much as talking to people about it, but kind of talking to yourself about it. So I feel like that could have helped him through it a little bit more and help him process everything that happened to him while he was in the war.
I agree with Abby, and I also feel like I just lost my train of thought. Earlier, like way earlier in the book, he talks about how like this is a story that he's never told before. So I feel like there's a lot of those in this book that he's just like trying to get out and like trying to get out of his mind, and it's like his way of healing.
I agree with that. I think it is like some type of like release because when my uncle got out, he goes to the weight room. Like he has his own gym now because that's how he gets his release. And then my other uncle, he just doesn't really have a release. He kind of just like thinks it up.
My grandpa was in the Vietnam War, and um, he never talks about it. The only thing I know is that him and his like buddies, they always did drugs all the time because that was the only way that they could cope with it while they were there, because of all of the hard training and all the hours that they couldn't sleep.
And I think O'Brien copes with it in a healthy way by like storytelling and writing his stories throughout the war. So I think he copes with it well.
It's a very safe way to deal with your pain rather than doing random little things. Like Norman, when he got home from the war, he drove around a lake at least like 11 times or something like that. And that was kind of how he reacted to being home. He kept thinking about how he was going to tell his parents and his ex-girlfriend, maybe if that's what she was. but instead he just kept driving around and never taking action. He just thought about it. He's like, I would tell him this, and I would tell her this, and I would show him, and all that, but he never actually really got far enough as to tell them what happened. So he just kind of held it in, and then eventually ended up not being able to find anything to help him release all of the stories that were built up and everything. So he ended up hanging himself in the locker room. So it just shows that it can take a toll on anybody that's involved. But if you don't release something, it's not going to get any better.
Okay, so I have a quote kind of go along with that. It says, "There was no suicide note, no message of any kind. Norman was a quiet boy," his mother wrote, "and I don't suppose he wanted to bother anybody." Why do you think O'Brien chooses to mention there was no suicide note, and why do you think Norman didn't leave one?
I think that he chooses to mention that to show that, like, to really show that Norman didn't know what to say, although he kind of did, like, he thought about what he was going to say. I think it was to show that what Norman was feeling kind of couldn't really be put into words, and that he couldn't form the words to say why he was killing himself, why he couldn't find a release, why he couldn't talk about it. So I think that him going was just kind of his way of saying that he couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't talk about it. He couldn't find his release. I forgot the second part of your question.
So I think again that can kind of go back to not telling his father and his ex-girlfriend about it. Is it mentions that he was a quiet boy and didn't want to bother anybody, so he's like, I want to tell them, but they're not really going to care. So he again just holds it all in.
I kind of have a question about this chapter. It says, why do you think O'Brien included the chapter speaking of courage in the book? Was he trying to get some sort of point across, or was it just for dramatic effect? And then I also have a quote. The war was over, and there was no place in particular to go. Norman Bowker followed the tar road on its 7-mile loop around the lake, and then he started it all over again, driving slowly, feeling safe inside his father's big Chevy, now and then looking out on the lake to watch boats and water skiers and scenery.
Was your question why did he include that chapter?
Yeah, was it did it have a purpose, or was it just for dramatic?
I think it had a purpose because it was like to show like one side of how people might react when they come back from the war and how they don't know what to do. So
I think it had a purpose because, like, O'Brien, he knew how to kind of cope with it, and he was showing the other side of it, how some people came back from the war and had no idea how to cope with it.
I agree with what Sam says because, as I mentioned earlier, my one uncle knew how to, and my other uncle didn't know how to. But I just think it was to show different perspectives throughout the book. Even here, it's not easy. In the interest of truth, however, I want to make it clear that Noah Bauer was in no way responsible for what happened to Keola. He did not freeze up, lose the Silver Star of Valor. What part of the story is my own story? And then I want to ask, what do you think he means when he's saying the part of the story is my own?
So when I read that, I couldn't really decide if he was trying to say that he, in that instance, he was writing himself as Norman Bowker, like he was saying I did that, or if he was saying that he made that part up. I couldn't really tell which he meant, so I really don't know how to answer that. Just because I wasn't sure.
I was also kind of wondering, like, if he was asking, because it happened to Norman, if he was asking if it was his story to tell, or like what part of the story does he play into, kind of. And then I didn't know. So
Yeah, I never really went back to.
Okay, so I don't know if I just made this part up in my head, but I remember something and it was talking about like how he was the guy that was like shining the flashlight on this girl's picture, and then like that's like when like everything happened, and that's why like his best friend got shot. That's just something that I remember. I'm pretty sure it happened. If not, then don't listen to me.
I don't remember, honestly.
The flashlight would shine. We don't know the name of the guy that shined the flashlight. It was the same kid that was looking for his girlfriend's picture afterwards. I don't think it was Norman. Was just the one that could have maybe fixed it. No, I'm not saying that it was Norman. I'm saying that like Brian was the one that shined. It was shining the flashlight. Because I remember
Jimmy Cross.
Jimmy Cross. No. No. Or maybe he did. I don't know. I just remember something that was like, and I killed my best friend. That's just all that.
Open split.
What chapter was this field? Was it in the field?
I think it was.
I really don't remember. Some parts of that were so hard to follow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we actually knew the name of the.
Not the boy, no.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, while Bailey's finding that, I have a lot of questions about the shit field. For some reason, I just came up with like 5, so I'll ask one or a few of them. If my phone will work real quick. One of them was, why would O'Brien tell the reader that he killed a man just to inform the reader later in the book that he didn't actually kill someone? And then doesn't this contradict his feelings about failing to write the truth of their story in the shipfield? So I have a quote from that part just to show like what he said about not telling the truth. He said, there was no choice but to remove the chapter entirely. The mistaken part had been trying to wedge the piece into a novel. Beyond that, though, something about the story had frightened me. I was afraid to speak directly, afraid to remember, and in the end, the piece had been ruined by a failure to tell the full and precise truth about our night in the shipfield. So, why would he feel guilty about not writing the truth for Kiawa's death and Norman's night in the shipfield and all that happened there? But then he tells us that I didn't really kill a man and I didn't actually do this and this didn't happen or this was embellished, like that kind of thing.
I think it was because the Kiwa's death to make it seem like it wasn't caused by this stupid little mistake. So he was like trying to make it some purpose besides the flashlight turned on and it killed him.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one just
You're forgetting what I'm gonna say.
But yeah, that's it. That's all I got right now.
You don't want a second to.
No.
I feel like subconsciously he feels like he truly has done some of the things that he says, oh, I didn't actually do this. I feel like because he said that being present is guilty enough, in some way he feels like he really did kill the man. And I feel like he really just somehow feels like he holds all this responsibility for things that he didn't do because he was there at the war, like, even though he didn't believe in it.
Did you not find anything? I kind of, at first I had no idea what you were talking about, but I think I know now. Like, I think I have a better idea of what you meant. Like, you mean the flashlight before the mortar fire? Or
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I really don't remember that part though.
Yeah.
I swear it was in there.
That's okay. We believe you.
If not, then I'm just psychotic and I made it.
That's okay. It's okay.
Alright, so I have a question. This book told of Kiyo's death from several different points of view. How do we know which one is the most accurate, and can we know for sure that any of them are completely true?
I don't think you can know when it's truly accurate because, well, like the only way you'd be able to find out is to ask the most yourself, but obviously you can't do that. I just think it's to show different perspectives and how different people saw it.
Like, because they tell I think at least 2 different ways of the story. They have like from all the flashlight and blowing up, and then there's also the story that I think it's Jimmy Cross sends to his father, where it's a completely different story.
I think it's kind of to connect how to like today, there's always two different sides to every single story. Uh, there is, and so I think it's almost to show that um, in a war, there are two different sides to the story, and I think it's kind of just to connect those two ideas together.
So, in English last year, if any of you remember, we watched a video called "The Danger of a Single Story." I think if it was like a TED Talk kind of thing. So she basically got up there and she said that you need to hear multiple different perspectives.
Was
like
it the
Pakistan?
one?
I think so.
Yeah.
She had
Okay, I remember that now.
the complicated name.
Yeah.
So I think that he kind of tells the different perspectives just to show like how different people can interpret it and to give you more ideas or more clarity. Maybe for you it makes it a little more cloudy, like what happened that night. But he just wants to show how everyone might have different happening truths or story truths, and everyone kind of processes terror and fear differently. So everyone's kind of going crazy in their heads, and they're all just seeing different things, making things up, and that kind of thing. So
I definitely agree with Gianna on that one because like nobody's story, even in life, is like ever the same. Everybody experiences different things. And that's the same thing with war. Sometimes like you're fine in a war, like nothing bad has ever happened to you, you've never been shot at, you're just doing what you're told, and other times like you see your best friend get killed and like those have different effects, and I think that he was just trying to show every perspective that he can.
My question though is like, yeah, because it talks about how Jimmy Cross blames himself for Kiwa's death, and then Norman, whatever his last name was, I don't know what
that's okay.
Um, he talks about how he blames himself for Kiwa's death, and then it also has the young soldier with the flashlight. I found it. Page 163. Not reading all that, but so it's like, there's the, so yeah, we don't know what story. They all three of them blame themselves for different reasons and stuff.
Everyone, everyone seems to kind of find a way to like blame themselves for it because they don't really know how to cope. It's like, well, I mean, I guess I did it because I was there, so how could I have not done it?
I feel like they also do it though, so they're not mad at like the other soldiers, but they're like, I'll take blame for it. Like I did this. It's my fault.
I feel like he's also trying to show like the toll of the war on people because it like makes them do crazy things, and even though like a person that didn't go to that war would think, oh, like it's not your fault, like why are you blaming yourself for it? But like when you're there, like in the moment, that's all you can think. Like I was there, like why didn't I do anything to help? Like this is my fault.
I have a quote that goes along with that. I blame it for taking away the person I once been, which is from chapter 19, page 176, and it refers it to as the war. The war really affected him as a person, and it changed him, and it may even go back. He may not even go back to what he was before the war. And the war affected the world, as in the people physically, emotionally, and also what people thought of the war.
I agree with what Ryan says. I actually have a quote that goes along with that. It says, I can look at things I never looked at. I can attach faces to grief and love and pity and God. I can be brave. I can make myself feel it. And I just think that was basically what Mariah said. It was like, once you go to war, you never see things the same. You never see people the same. Like, the memories always come back up.
So I think we're back then. So it says, when a man died, there had to be blame. Jimmy Cross understood this. You could blame the war. You could blame the idiots who made the war. You could blame Kiowa for going to it. You could blame the rain. You could blame the river. You can blame the field, the mud, the climate. So he's telling that, like, you can't blame yourself, but all they do is blame themselves. So why do you think he says that?
I think he wants to like blame other things, but he doesn't. He wants to like he has to blame himself for it because he doesn't want the other soldiers to be mad or anyone else to feel that way because other people say you can blame someone else, but it's easier to blame yourself for it. Just to,
You can't really blame like things that you can't control, like the rain and the climate and stuff. So he's just blaming himself because he feels like he could have controlled himself to help himself.
And I don't think he can like 100% like prove that it was someone's fault, but like he can like say it's my fault. Like he can't prove that, but he can like say that and give more evidence for why it was.
I don't remember if this quote was said, so forgive me because I was looking for it. But at one point, it said Norman Boker looked out across the wet field. Nobody's fault. He said everybody's. I don't know. Was that said? Okay. Sorry, I was looking for it. But so I think that in this way, he's kind of saying like that everybody who was there did play a part in kind of what happens. Um, whether you were the person who like shot them, you still like somehow like played a part, I guess, by being there in the war. And although like that might not cause you to be for blame for what happened, you could still feel the blame. So I think that it just kind of shows that they couldn't really blame one person for anything specifically.
And it could have happened. What happened to Kiawa could have happened to anybody. So everyone was in the field. Everyone in their unit, whatever you want to call it, they were all there, and any one of them could have stood up to Jimmy Cross and said, "This isn't the right place to stay." I think someone might have, but he got the command from higher up, so he didn't really think. But if they all stood up and they're like, "We can't stay here," then it could have been changed. Or if they all were watching each other's backs a little bit closer, even though it would have been hard in all of the chaos, they could have saved Kiawa. And there's a million things everybody could have done that would take the blame away from them. But since, again, in all the chaos, it's hard to do everything perfectly. So everyone kind of gets a little bit of blame for that.
I kind of found a quote to go along with what Gianna was saying about Jimmy Cross. It said on page 161, he replaced the blame where it belonged. Tactically, he'd say it was indefensible ground from the start. Low, flat, no natural cover, and so late in the night when they took mortar fire across the river, all they could do was snake down under the slop and lie there and wait. And I was kind of saying like how he knew the ground like wasn't like a good place to stay, but like he like was told to stay there, so he did. And like part of that blame could be placed on him, and then like blame could just be placed. Sorry, I hit my elbow. Like, I'm sorry. And blame can be placed on everyone because the book also talks about little things that everybody did that night. But like if they didn't do that, then like Kiawa could still be alive, but it happened and you can't really change that.
I have a quote to go with what both you said. In the field, though, the causes were immediate. A moment of carelessness or bad judgment or plain stupidity carried consequences that lasted forever. Yeah, like they don't know what, or like if they didn't turn on the flashlight and lead to Kiwa's death, there was any other little thing probably could have led to it. So, like, if Kiwa didn't die, somebody else would have died that night, or something else would have happened.
So what I have to kind of go with that is like, you could create a million different scenarios in your head about what could have happened if this person did this differently, or if this, you could go on and on and on. But you can't really change the fact that it happened this way. So, yeah.
Now that like we read the whole book, what are things that you learned and like didn't know about
I personally did not really know anything about the Vietnam War. We didn't really have any close family that fought in it, and it's never really been anything that we've been taught or learned about.
The only thing I knew from the Vietnam War came from my uncle, and he doesn't really talk about it a lot. And when he does, it's not necessarily stories I'd like to hear, because they're usually about like what the soldiers did with alcohol and drugs and women and stuff. So I learned a lot about how the war really was to the soldiers and how it affected them emotionally and everything.
And going along with that, I have a quote that says, "You are a shadow. You slip out of your own skin like molten, shedding your own history and your own future, leaving behind everything you ever were or wanted or believed in." Like, I knew about the war before it happened, but like after like reading the whole book and that quote, it showed like how big of an impact it actually was and like what all those people had to go through.
So I knew, like, because my brother apparently for some reason knows when stuff about the Vietnam War, so I knew like a bunch of these stories from him. But it's kind of different hearing it from someone who's actually in the war and being told as a story. So that's different.
I have a deeper like appreciation for everyone who fought the war. Like it was a horrible thing, and I couldn't imagine going through it. And I think reading this just opened my mind to more things.
I have a question about the last chapter because I think that was a pretty important chapter before like in our discussion or anything. The quote said, "It sounds funny," I said, "but that poor man he reminds me of. I mean, there's this girl I used to know. I took her to the movies once, my first date." Kyo looked at me for a long while. Then he leaned back and smiled, man. He said, "That's a bad date." And then, like, indents or whatever, it says, "Linda was 9 then, as was I, but we were met. It was real." And my question is, in the lives of the dead, why does O'Brien go back and forth about the girl he left in the war? Why does O'Brien bring up the girl in the first place?
He wants to bring her up. Going back to what we kind of talked about earlier, he wants to bring her back alive and just. He also wants to kind of show his first encounter with death. That was the first time he ever saw a dead body because he and his father went to the funeral home and they looked at the body and he's like, I can't believe she's actually dead. Like he looked at his dad and he's like, is this real? And it was just to show his first experience with death and how he felt about all of it.
I have a question to go along with that. Kind of go along with Bailey's question. Why do you think O'Brien chose to include Lydia in her death at the end of the novel, and how do you think this contributed to the story?
I think it also contributed to the story because in the story about Linda, it talks about how there was the boy who kept trying to snatch her hat. Then, way earlier in the story, it talks about one of the deaths with the dude and how they kept trying to make O'Brien go up and touch the dead old man and all that. I think it correlates there how they both like, pressured him to see what was happening and led to death.
I also think like their date to the movies, if they were gonna see a horror movie, so I think that was like the first connection between like love and gore. So
I also have a question about the last chapter. So the last chapter begins with, but this is true. Stories can save us, and so why do you think that in like that he chooses to start his? Okay, wait, hold on. Sorry, let me just restart. I worded it weird. Okay, why do you think O'Brien chose to start the last chapter with, "But this is true. Stories can save us," and then like just a little bit later, like 4 words later, it says, "In a story which is kind of dreaming, the dead sometimes smile and sit up and return to the world." So why do you think that he started it with this, and why do you think he decided to word it like that?
I think he decided to do that because, like, when he was writing this, he was saving himself, but he also brought like the dead along like with the story. It was bringing them alive. It was bringing everyone that knew them. Like, it was just saving all of them from like finally getting the truth out.
I think also it was to help him find peace because like the soldiers like hold guilt for all the other people that died with him, but when he wrote about them, he like realized it wasn't his fault. And all that it was just like to release himself.
So really quickly, I have one question. It's kind of off topic, but I think I haven't asked all of them I need to. So why would O'Brien include the short chapter style just to tell the reader that he saw a girl dancing in a home where her family was just killed? Do you think it's similar to the soldier's way of coping?
I think that it was to show um, how, especially with how her ears were covered while she was dancing, I think it was to show how impactful, like looking around and seeing like all the damage and all the families, to see that this girl, her family just died, and she's outside of her house dancing with her ears covered to kind of maybe, I think, forget about what just happened and not think about that her family just died, that her family's gone.
I think it was to show like the different ways that people can cope with something. Some people dance, some people work out, some people write books, some people go run every day. They just have different methods.
I think it kind of shows like sometimes how odd things can be when people choose to cope. Like she was dancing, which most people see as like a happy kind of upbeat kind of thing, and then Norman Bowker drove around a lake, and then as Faith said, people write and then do other things to kind of release.
Sorry, did cut you off?
No, you're fine.
I was gonna say I definitely agree with Gianna. Like there's many ways to cope. Like personally, I cry a lot. Other people might like to go hang out with their friends. Other people drive around the lake and everything. It's just to show like how like different perspectives there are and like how people cope with things.
I do have I have one more question that I want to ask, and I know that we're like getting to the end.
Just go.
So I'm gonna keep going. Okay, so
Can you guys wait for just a second, please? Can you guys wait for just a second, please? Okay, go ahead. Just hurry up.
okay, so anyways,
Can you guys wait?
so okay, so in the end of the book, how does O'Brien show the impact that the war has had by saying, I was Timmy then, I am Tim now, even though he had previously stated that he hasn't changed at all from before.
I'm just saying that he kind of he's grown up since the war, or since he was younger too. And that maybe your nickname can change, but you as a person can't change that much. You just mature and become better than what you were, maybe. I don't really know. If we do, we can always come in like later. Because